I get to stay because I'm going to take you through to our last panel of the day. And that is also something I wanted to bring up is you can continue. I see some questions there, but we have to move on. We have a great fireside chat exploring the potential of in-game brand ads. So we led right up to it without even wanting to do that. We've been talking about branding. This is going to be a fireside that will give us a data-driven view into what to think about when monetizing with native ads, how to keep the experience amazing, a lot to chew on. And I'm sorry, I just can't resist the pun as Chris Wright, one of our speakers, has used the reset to cook, makes a mean beef bouillon and good to go. Good on that as well. Hannes has used the time to push his startup to the next level. And here's this fireside that's going to bring it to the next level. Dave, I will hand it over to you.
Thank you very much, Peggy. Got a great afternoon. It's been here. I appreciate you moderating all afternoon on this track. It's been great. I'm very pleased to be hosting this final fireside chat of the day. We've got a really interesting talk coming up. First, I've just got to say, Chris, I think your Zoom avatar is Manic Miner, or perhaps more accurately, Jet Set Willy. Is that right? Good work. You're muted there, Chris. Actually, I'm going to bring you in a sec if I may. So we're here exploring the potential of in-game play brand ads. Now, the new types of ad formats has been something that's come up a few times during the course of the day, and this fireside chat's going to explore some real hands-on examples here, some real case studies of AdInMo's technology, and sort of look at that in the wider context of native in-game advertising generally. We can talk about ad formats, but we're going to really narrow down on what we've learned about native in-game advertising. Got a couple of great speakers here, including Hannes Hultgren, who's the Chief Scientific Officer of Impact Unified, who are using AdInMo's SDK in their game, and then Chris Wright, as I've said, Chief Technology Officer at AdInMo itself. So, guys, welcome. Thank you very much here for joining us at Pocket Gamer Connect Digital number 6. Really appreciate your time. Tell you what, let's start. If you could just introduce yourself. Chris, I'll come to you first. If you could both introduce yourself and your companies, and then we'll dive into some of the questions I've got about the technology here. So, yeah, Chris, introduce yourself, please, and AdInMo.
Sure, thanks, Dave. So I'm Chris Wright. I've been in the games industry for at least 25 years. So previous to this, I co-founded the analytics company Delta DNA, which got bought by Unity a couple of years ago. And then I joined AdInMo. I'm CTO at AdInMo, and we are an in-game native ad technology company. So we provide ads directly into the game experience. So like billboards around racetracks, as a really obvious example of the sort of thing we do.
That's great, thank you. And we'll come back to that because I think there's some great examples of stuff that's going on there. So Hannes, yes, please, if you could introduce yourself.
Thanks. So I'm from Impact Unified, and we're a Swedish startup that was founded by me, my two brothers, an uncle and a friend, so a small business. We actually started off doing board games and some VR stuff, and now we switched over to mobile games. So often with like a social or educational impact. So we're trying to make smaller niche games that fits our budget, so to speak, or what we can achieve.
That's great, thank you. So this is a really interesting fireside chat here because we've got somebody from the ad side of things and the tech side of things there, and a developer here to kind of talk across the issue. So first, Chris, I'm going to come to you with the big question to start us off. What is then the in-game advertising we're talking about? In-game play brand ads, we've said in the title of the talk, we're talking about native advertising. Can we define what that is and how it differs from other types of ads?
Yeah, sure. So Dave, so this has been around for a while. Let's be clear. It was first, I suppose, the first time it really hit the industry was probably well over 10 years ago now with Massive, who kind of famously did it in among other things, Burnout Paradise. I remember there was Obama ads in Burnout Paradise. So that concept, I suppose, is kind of well defined, that you actually have an ad directly in a game experience. So as I said, like a billboard is one really simple example in a racetrack. That is evolved. To be honest, at that point, it was probably too early. That advertising wasn't really part of the games industry. Brands didn't really understand why they would advertise to the market, and the market in reality was too small for when you're talking console. But now we're talking mobile, and mobile has evolved to the point where you've got powerful enough devices to be able to do this full 3D environments, and you can put these ads directly into the game. So they're branded ads. They are billboards, so just like, I suppose, out of home, as you walk down the street, you see it on the side of bus shelters, that sort of thing. But beyond that, you can start to think about it not just as static ads, but as videos or even as objects. And I think we'll probably kind of talk more about that. But these are ads that are directly part of the experience. The key thing is that they're branded. So they are not clickable. So they are all about impressions and encouraging, I suppose, the players to learn about a product and to buy the product without having to get them to click on something and go off and install and take them away from the game experience. So it keeps it within the experience, it keeps it within the world that you're playing, but it allows advertisers to advertise to players within the context of the game, and that's kind of key to it.
Right. So we're talking about sort of non-interruptive form of advertising, aren't we? That's kind of present.
Very much. The whole point of this is it should feel a part of the experience. It doesn't take the player out. It doesn't force them to go and watch something. It doesn't encourage them or get them to have to click on it or go and leave the game experience. It is non-interruptive, experiential branding. And it should hopefully add to the experience rather than take the user away, which is what advertising generally does. It forces the user to doing something else whilst they're actually trying to play the game. This is all part within the game experience, not outside of the experience.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, so Hannes, maybe you could give us an example. I don't know whether you want to add to the definition there, but certainly, what does it mean to you then? How are you using it?
Yeah, so like to me, it is an ad format that can be truly non-invasive, like you said, Chris, and doesn't piss people off. And in some sense, it's a dream for a game designer or developer to put this in your game compared to an interstitial that requires a click and then your player is lost. So I mean, and maybe we'll get to that later, but our game is a sports game, and here it's actually really nice to have these ads changing on billboards. It adds to the atmosphere, it increases the immersion, which will increase the playtime and therefore the revenue for us. So it's yeah,
that's interesting because we will come back to this, but it's interesting how the placement of ads then sort of adds to the authenticity of your game rather than detracting from it. What's a real world comparison here? Are we talking like, is it product placement in TV shows? Is it that kind of thing? Is it, if people in the audience are unfamiliar with this kind of advertising, is that the kind of similar sort of experience?
It's close. The closest thing in the real world is out of home. So it is those billboards. That is the closest. It will evolve to that kind of product placement, but it's definitely, in some respects, it is like that. Those billboards, and actually, sports, Hannes, and a sports game, that's very obvious. The idea of having billboards around your soccer match makes so much sense, and actually, people expect that. So you get football games have had that. I remember looking back to even the 80s when they would put them on anyway, and they would have just the game names or the company name, because you expect to have brands around it. So actually, without that, it feels strange. Same with racing games, you expect the brands to be there. So that is probably the closest. Of course, the big advantage we have is we're digital, so therefore we can vary that ad. We can personalize it to the user. We can make it directly attributable. We understand who's seen it, so we can do attribution against it. So we have a lot of the same capabilities that other digital formats do that you just don't get in out of home. But we have that ability to do it without interrupting the users. And we know, we've done surveys. We did an interesting survey fairly recently, and actually one of the feedback from that was that I think it was 68% of users prefer this kind of advertising to other kinds to more invasive, like your standard interstitials or your rewarded ads.
Right.
When you compare the two, actually, the majority of users prefer this type of advertising, which makes sense because it doesn't interrupt them. But that's
absolutely. In fact, let me take that back to Hannes then. Actually, Hannes, so the sports game you spoke about is Umpire's Call. Is that right? That's the game.
That's right. Yeah.
So it's a cricket game. It's a very realistic 3D environment that you've got there. It's a good place to start. So just to go back to what you were saying, why is it particularly important for you with this kind of game to have then a non-invasive form of advertising in it?
So maybe one thing is that it actually adds to the atmosphere, like we said before. It's very much easier to make the game come to life when you see that you have input from outside world in it. So everything doesn't have to be animated or programmed by us, but it's actually new ads every time you play. And the other thing, back to that again, that you can actually expose people to this kind of ads for quite long without pissing them off. So like the best example is actually when you walk down the street and you see billboards or posters on the wall. You're exposed, you see it, you register it, but it doesn't annoy you.
Yeah.
It's really the same in this game. And our cricket game is a bit of a niche game, so we focused on only one certain aspect of cricket, so the umpire's call. So you're actually playing as an umpire, not as a cricket player. And we have realized that the fans or the players we have, they are really careful about the details, and it's really easy to annoy them. Okay. So this way of adding advertising is great in that sense also, because we know that they hate interstitials, maybe even more than other players.
So as a developer then, how easy was it to implement this? I'm talking specifically about AdInMo's solution here, but is it, what was your experience as a developer of setting this up?
It's super smooth. I mean, the actual integration of the SDK, the time that takes is insignificant. So what takes time later is to find these nice spots in your game,
right.
and choosing where to put that. But this is a creative job. It's actually fun. I mean, it's not a burden in that sense. And next step where we are now actually is to move them around, change them, and experiment and see where they bring the most revenue. So to understand it, this is new to us. So to understand how to optimize it.
And so far, your experience of it, has it aided retention, for instance? I mean, the experience we've spoken about, but are you actually seeing results in terms of the player retention?
We think so, but we haven't tested enough, so I don't have actual data to prove it or back that up, but we think so.
Before I talk a little bit about the player's perspective here, can I just take a sidestep and ask you both, and maybe Chris, I'll come to you first. I completely understand how this kind of advertising can be used in a realistic 3D environment, obviously a cricket ground, for instance, or a racetrack or something like this. But are there examples of other sorts of games where it could fit in? I mean, not all games are set in a realistic 3D environment. There are many games that are very quite abstract. In fact, does this kind of advertising suit every developer?
Yeah, no. Just before I get to that, just to kind of follow on from what Hannah said, we've actually had a couple of developers who've done A/B testing on some of our ads, and we do see an increase in retention from it compared to putting other ads, or actually not even ads, not any ads in the game. So we have seen that effect. As you start to get, you're right. The type of game, there's some very obvious games. Sports games are very obvious. We've got an interesting fashion game, and that again is very obvious. Real world games work really well. We have a game design team at AdInMo who actually works with our developers. I mean, it's really good to hear Hannah saying that our SDK is nice and easy to integrate. That's really good, especially being CTO. But we kind of recognize that one of the hardest parts of this is actually, because it's a new format, how do you integrate this into the game experience and make it work with your game? We've been looking at a lot of different kinds of games. So we find that puzzle games actually work quite well, especially because they're quite static. And so the ad can be on the screen for a longer time than you'd normally expect. First-person shooters obviously work. The more realistic the game, the better. But actually, even with quite kind of cartoony environments, then it works. And that can relate to the types of ads that you put in. And our ability to control those ads so that they fit in with the experience is really key to this, because the two things kind of link together. It's having a good experience so that the ad should feel like it doesn't jar with the experience, even if it's not necessarily completely natural. It shouldn't jar with the experience. And some of that is how you place them and where you place them within the game, and some of it is the actual ads that appear, so that they don't kind of jump out as being out of context within the game experience.
Right. So thinking, you mentioned puzzle games, it's like a kind of branded background, perhaps, or some kind of tabletop with a logo on it, or something, that sort of thing. Exactly.
Or we've seen things where they've got a like a static board, but they have kind of actually characters. We've seen one where they've got a kind of a plane that flies behind it, past at the background, almost like a bit of visual experience, and then they run the ad at the back of the plane, kind of hanging off like a flag. So you can have things that kind of add to the experience, or things that are in the background. You can even do it with specific objects. We've seen ones where the puzzle game actually, it brands the objects. Another one is card games, where you have a cards, and the back of the cards are ads. Again, that kind of works really well with the ads, and it fits into the experience as well. It doesn't feel that it doesn't jar, even though the ads wouldn't specifically always be on the back of cards. You can understand why that would be, and so it fits.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, talking about the experience then, Hannes, I'm going to come back to you. From a player's perspective then, from your game's players, do these kind of ads impact on the game's performance at all? Does the SDK have any kind of impact on the game's performance?
We haven't seen anything like that with this static ads or But I can imagine if down the road when videos are or might be introduced, then we need to be a bit more careful, because in our audience we have a lot of low-end phones, players in India, Pakistan, and so on. So there we might have to be a bit careful, but otherwise, no.
That makes sense. I guess we can come back to that later on. I think maybe the idea of video billboards, for instance, that has a technical impact there. But before we get to there, the current ads that you're playing at the moment, we've spoken about Chris and AdInMo's technology. We've spoken about you as the developer. We've spoken about the players. What about the ad buyers? Can either of you speak to how ad buyers are valuing these ads? Are they, do they understand it? Are ad buyers kind of getting the idea? And are they willing to pay more or less for this compared to other formats? What are you finding?
So obviously we sit on both sides. So we're very much a two-sided marketplace. So we're talking to a lot of the agencies. It's interesting, and it was interesting that the previous talk was all starting to talk about branded ads and coming. And that's what we're seeing as well, that brands, historically, games have been basically game on game, advertising a competitor's game within a game. And that's kind of very obvious. Brands are starting to get a lot more interested in games because the audience is there. They're following the audience. And they want to be able to do it in a way that they understand. So we're certainly starting to see some real interest. We work with a lot of the exchanges, and they see this as a premium type of format to sell, not just an interstitial. We're actually working with a number of agencies now as well. So it's early days. I mean, I think the clear thing is we're still at the very start of this process, but we're definitely getting a lot of interest from brands wanting to run trials, wanting to put ads in games, wanting to understand what the effect of that is. Initially, just as, I suppose, as billboards, they can take it from other examples and place it there. And then, getting more creative. So could we actually do slightly more kind of product placement type ads as well? So there's definitely an interest there, and we're starting to see that from the amount of money we can start to charge. So, with initial campaigns, it's probably fairly similar to branded interstitials. We're starting to get up from maybe $5 up to maybe $20 CPMs at the kind of at the top end as you start to get into some of the bigger brands. But we certainly think that this will, as brands start to understand this, it'll actually start to move up the CPM level, kind of more like influencer campaigns or product placement campaigns, which actually, if you look at influencer campaigns, you can be up at the $200 CPM. So the opportunity is really high when you start to really push this up. But at the moment, it's still very early days, and so they're still just trying to understand it. But there's a lot of interest from the agency specifically to kind of explore new formats, because a lot of these formats are fairly tired now.
Yeah, yeah. In fact, actually, you mentioned that when we were speaking earlier on, and I said about what was a real world example, influencer campaigns or something else that popped into my head. Before, I've got a few questions here, but I've just clocked the time, so I just want to remind everyone here that if you have questions for Chris and Hannes, please drop them into the Q&A box on your Zoom window, and I'll curate those when we get to the end. We'll make some time at the end to take questions from the audience, so please do that. Let's talk a little bit about the brand experience then, just carrying on from what you were saying, Chris, about the ad buyers, but also I'll come to you with this first, Hannes, because as a game maker, how do you find that the type of ads that are being played? Because obviously you created a 3D world here, a very realistic world. You're obviously very protective of your game, and the ad buyers are protective of their brands. How can you be sure that how can the advertisers be sure that their ad will appear in a complementary environment? And how can you be sure as a developer that what's being on display inside your cricket ground is appropriate for the type of game?
Yeah, I mean, there are two sides to that. One is that we don't want to show ads that doesn't fit the gameplay atmosphere. That's one thing, and the other part or in our case, it's the ethical aspect. We don't want to have ads in the arena for tobacco, casinos, firearms, porn, and so on, right? I mean, this is something that has to be handled by the SDK and the mediation there. So, because that is a really important thing.
How much choice do you get in that? It just forgive me because I'm not a developer. Does the SDK allow you to make those kind of choices, or is it about your relationship with AdInMo who developed the SDK? At what point do you get to influence those choices?
I think we'll pass that question to Chris because we haven't really digged into that yet, configuring the ads in that sense.
So the moment we limit it, so we're working with the developers like Hannes to make sure, and we obviously remove any tobacco or any ones that you wouldn't want to be in the game. So we act like pretty much any other ad SDK that we control the ads that go through. What we're wanting to do, we have a whole triage system that allows us to look into the ads and work out which ones are actually allowed through. We have a plan that will roll out this year where we'll actually allow access to that by our developers. So developers will actually so we'll do the first triage and we'll control and make sure that bad ads don't get through. But our objective is to then open this up basically as self-service so that if developers want to, they can go in and actually control which ads can see. And we have a really interesting fingerprinting technology that allows them to see in the ad and actually default it on or off and say, okay, I want to accept an ad, and only once that I've accepted it will that ad be displayed, or vice versa. I'll actually default. I want to remove stuff. So we see this as really important to developers to allow them to control what goes on in their game because these ads are part of the game experience. So we're building a whole interface to allow developers to actually control the ads themselves and really manage the ad experience.
Yeah, that's interesting. Okay, that's great. Thank you. Again, just a reminder to anyone if they have questions to ask you. But I've got a question here. We touched on this earlier on, and you mentioned video billboards. So what does the future hold for non-intrusive advertising? What are other formats? For instance, interactive versions of these ads. What's coming down the road towards us? Video, audio, whatever. Wild speculation, welcome, but also from your experience, Hannes, what do you think? What do you think the future holds for this type of ad?
Well, for us, it would be great. The next step would be to introduce this assets into the gameplay so that you can interact with them and they maybe even become a part of the story and the game mechanics of the game. So in our case, one can think of branded tournaments, join this knockout tournament now, sponsored by, and then a big brand there. Or you can change the clothes of the players, or maybe even the stadium, take you to a different stadium somewhere else. So there's tons of things to think of there and to develop.
That's interesting, Chris. What about yourself from AdInMo's perspective? What do you think is coming down the road towards us?
So we're working on video just as a kind of example. So going to be putting video in really short form video, so not 30-second, but very similar to what you get on the sides of bus stations, not surprisingly, bus billboards. So 4-second type videos, those type of non-audio videos. We our latest SDK actually now allows us to put objects, so it moves us from straight billboards into actual objects. So the ability to have more like product placement, cans of something, bottles or something. So I actually start to make it more interactive. But yeah, as Hannah says, the more you can start to brand whole environments. One of the nice things about our system is that you can actually set placements up, so you can turn a whole, say a whole racetrack over to a certain brand.
Right.
We have that capability right now, and that would, you could even choose, okay, as you go in, I think I want this my track branded by Nike, and then the whole racetrack would be sponsored by Nike. So you can start to do some of this already, and you can kind of see how that's going to evolve. But definitely making it more towards product placement and actual objects is going to be the big kind of step ups from these kind of static billboards to more interactive, without pressing. I think that the key to this is that it should be a part of the experience, but it shouldn't get in the way. It shouldn't force users to have to click on things or interact with something they don't want to.
Doesn't interrupt the gaming. Absolutely. Yeah. In fact, we're kind of we haven't got any questions here, but it's possible because we're sort of running out of time. I'll just remind everyone that if you want to catch up with either of these guys to dive further into this, head over to Meet to Match or Discord and send the messages there. But I've got another question for you, because it's very timely, and I don't know whether this impacts on anything you're working on at the moment, either of you. But of course, the retirement of Apple's IDFA is a big topic at the moment, and we might be seeing the latest version of iOS, imminently, maybe even this week while we're here at the conference. That would be fun, right? So, can you guys speak to that? Does that have an impact on? What impact do you think that's going to have on these kind of ads compared to the rest of the ad market? I don't know, Hannah, as a developer, are you watching the IDFA situation with a lot of interest?
Yeah, sure. We spent lots and lots of hours preparing for this, sorting things out. I don't really know what's going to happen with the revenue, but I expect it to go down at least in the beginning, right? But then in the long run, I think that the ad buyers, they will also adapt. I mean, the whole industry will change there. So
yeah,
but it's a tricky one. So
yeah, exactly. And I guess sorry. I was just going to say, and Chris, you're they're obviously in your role in AdInMo watching it all. What's your take on the IDFA situation?
Yeah, I mean, it obviously impacts us to some extent. Because we're not on performance, it's not quite so vital because of the attribution. We still work with the attribution partners, and we're integrated into the new Apple attribution system, the AdSK network technology, so we can still do that attribution if required. It does mean that we're sending, at the moment at least, less data down to exchanges when this comes through, which means that, as Hannah said, it potentially might impact some of the CPMs, though because we're branded, it probably has less effect on us than it would do on other ads, because we're not quite so absolutely targeted. We're doing much more we're doing a lot more work on getting Coca-Cola or things that you can't buy with a click. I mean, this is the thing. You can't sell a can of Coke with a click. You can't sell Mustang with a click. These are things about trying to encourage people to buy stuff. And so I think in the branded space, it's more about the type. So we still know the kind of user from the type of game they're playing. We have some information about the user, so we can still provide some of that data back, and that is generally what advertisers want, especially where the game is specific. So sports games, that encourages a very specific. Nike would be very interested in being a sports game. BMW would be interested in being in a racing game. So these are much more related to the actual game experience rather than that very, very targeted specific user, which is where the traditional ads goes. And that's why the IDFA going is probably going to hit them a lot worse than, to be honest, it's going to hit us, because we're slightly at a higher level, but providing a much more kind of interesting experience for those advertisers within the game.
Yeah, absolutely, much more contextual. Look, I'll tell you what, we're kind of at the end of our time here, so I'm going to have to invite Peggy back in. I see she's there. I want to thank you both. Just remind everyone, of course, if you want to find out more about AdInMo or about Umpire's Call and Hannah's game there, look up these guys on Meet to Match or on the Discord. And I want to say, look, thank you very much. A round of applause. You can't hear from everyone else. You'll have to imagine it. We're actually going to be doing, I hope, a return to live events later this year. So hopefully we'll see you guys in person. Thank you very much for that. Fascinating. And when people do ask me what I think the big trends are, one of the things I say to them is that we're looking at new ad formats this year. I think it's a fascinating place to be. So thank you very much for your time to help explain some of this stuff to us.
Great. Thanks, Dave.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
See you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Dave. That was an amazing panel. I really enjoyed it. I'm very fascinated by the advance of audio as well. So
Right,
and think about those moving, talking billboards, a little bit of Blade Runner going on here.
right.
that I will leave you with. So an awesome panel and to an excellent day. Thank you so much.
Thank you.